yeah, we're covering the first two episodes of Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man. This is going to be spoiler-ish. Not too heavy on spoilers, but spoiler-ish. All right, that's it. That's all I got for the intro. Cue the music. Welcome to Don't Evolve Me, the place like Ash Ketchum's Pikachu. We don't evolve. We just level up, doing fresh takes on your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. And I think I'm just going to get this out of the way, because I think this is the question that a lot of people are asking. Is this show good? Is it worth watching? And the answer to both of those are, yeah, it's actually a really good show. And it's definitely worth watching, which I'm kind of surprised that that's the case. And before I get into why the show is good, why it's worth watching, why it's actually like worth your time, which is, I didn't think that was going to be the case. I'm going to get into where my thought process was entering the show, because I didn't have a lot of hype. I didn't have a lot of excitement. I didn't really care for the show. And it's not because I don't love Spider-Man. I love Spider-Man. If you're going to pitch me a new Spider-Man show, I'm not going to say no to it. But I realized my excitement for the show is minimal. Was minimal. And it's now the opposite. The reason why it was minimal is we're kind of dealing with superhero fatigue. And not necessarily because we're not interested in superheroes anymore, just like what happened with Westerns. I think it's just more or less, we have a lot. There is so much superhero content. Like 15 years ago, we were begging for like a lot. Like we were begging for superhero stuff. We were wanting it. We were excited for it at the MCU. We were excited for the Dark Knight trilogy. We were excited for Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man at this point. Like we were excited for Green Arrow show, Flash when it was coming out, and like that was more, I hate to call it low quality TV, but cable television. So their budgets were smaller. And I think just the idea of like what we have now is like, as a fan of superheroes, really excites me. But now 15 years later or so, it's just crazy to think that like 14 years ago I was in high school. But like 14, 15 years later, we are finally at the point where it's like, hey, a new Spider-Man show is coming out, and like there's nothing on the internets, nothing on the interwebs about really this show. There's not a whole lot of excitement because like I feel like we're at a point now, it's just so hit. There's not a whole lot of build up for shows that are coming out like it was 15 years ago. So this Spider-Man show is about to come out, and there was like no hype for it. On top of the fact that like there was some hype, and we'll get into the little bit of hype that it has. But it's a show that I knew was coming out for about 6 months now. Like I knew it was going to come out later, like a lot longer, like when they announced it. But it's a show that was like, okay, what's happening in 2025? Hey, the Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man animated show is finally going to come out. I was like, cool. I'm not super excited about it. And mostly because at this point, we had so many Spider-Man shows. So many different shows have come out for Spider-Man. And I feel like Disney, since we're like acquiring Spider-Man, and I remember when Disney like bought Marvel, and Spider-Man was part of, like, the Spider-Man TV deals was a part of it, because we were in the middle of Spectacular Spider-Man. I just started watching Spectacular Spider-Man. I remember watching it all the way to season 2 and be like, damn, the show is, like, amazing. It's good. It's spectacular. Pun intended. And then they're like, well, nope, Disney's coming out. We're going to come out with a new animated Spider-Man show, The Ultimate Spider-Man, which is, it was a fine show. The Deadpool episode, really great. You should watch it. Other than that, it was fine. And then they had a couple other Spider-Man shows that came out, and it was just kind of like animated Spider-Man show. Wasn't that appealing. Was made for mostly kids. Then, with the whole phase 4, phase 5 of Disney, all these different shows are coming out, all these different animated shows started coming out. We got Marvel What If, which was, I think when it came out, pretty good, pretty great. And then we had, of course, X-Men 97, which I still need to watch. And I know, I need to watch it. I know. It's one of those shows that just like, it doesn't click for me. Like every time I try to like put it down, it just doesn't click with the old ADHD brain. It just doesn't grab me for whatever. Like it's not that I think the show's not good. It's just the X-Men animated show has never captured my attention, old and new. I've tried watching it. I just haven't yet. But I know that a lot of people like that show. So I feel like my hype for the Spider-Man show should have been a little bit higher just based off like their track record of the two animated shows, What If and X-Men 97 should have been a little bit higher. And after watching the two shows, yeah, should have been a lot more hype for the show. But originally when the show came out, the idea was that this was going to be the first freshman year of Tom Holland's Spider-Man. That was what was pitched. And I think, at least for myself, and I think a couple others that I've seen online, it wasn't really that great of an idea. It was like it's a prequel of a story, of an origin story that we didn't really need at the time. We didn't really need an origin story of Spider-Man. We didn't really need the MCU Spider-Man to have that origin story. I'll just be honest, I didn't really care about the first year or so. I didn't need it. I didn't need that. Didn't really ask for it. And then I think the show evolved over time. It sounds like from the showrunner, it was like 2 months originally. It was supposed to be for the MCU. And then they decided, hey, we're just going to make our own story. It's going to be its own thing. And I think they decided to do that for the better. I think having your own show in your own universe that isn't a prequel just opens up so much more, and I'm so much more excited for this. So now I'm at this point where coming up to this show, a lot more information started coming out. We got White Suit Spider-Man, as you can see. We got a lot more characters. Nico Minoru was one of them. Lonnie Lott as kind of like the Flash antagonist. Then we got like a black Norman Osborn, a black Harry Osborn. And of course, we started hearing a lot of like naysayers talk about those characters and how this show is going to be woke. And I'll get to the comments of, believe the voice actor of Peter Parker, Hudson Thames. And we'll get to those comments. Because I want to get through this, and then we'll talk about how great the show is. My whole thoughts of people complaining about the show, like, oh, Harry's black now, oh, Norman Osborn's black now, they're robbing white characters, all that negative talk. Here's my thought process. If this bothers you, you don't have to watch the show. If this bothers you, there's good news, my friends. If the recasting of characters, if the changing of race of these characters bother you, Norman Osborn and Harry Osborn specifically, I have good news for you. There is several other shows for you to watch that has Harry Osborn and Norman Osborn as being white. Good news. Like, you can just watch those shows. You don't have to watch this show. My take on like the race swapping, gender swapping, because there was a couple other characters that were like gender swap. We've watched so many Spider-Man shows. There's so much Spider-Man shows. There's at least a dozen high-quality Spider-Man shows to watch. There are several iterations of Spider-Man to watch with characters that have the original like race and gender from the comic books. You can go watch that. I think we just have so much Spider-Man at this point that I don't care if we have different characters that are different from the comic book counterpoint. I don't care at this point. Like, we've watched so many different shows. There's so many different Spider-Man options that I don't mind there being different characters. It feels more fresh. Spider-Man Homecoming. We had the black version of MJ, or the Michelle Jones of MJ. And I think that's perfectly fine. We don't need Mary Jane Watson. We don't need Gwen Stacy. We don't need all the same characters because we have so much media covering those characters. So for this show, your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, to come in and have a whole different like group of characters, a whole different group of supporting characters, works. And it's very fresh. Nico Benoro is maybe like my second favorite character of the show outside of Peter Parker himself. She's an exciting character. So, and then we get to what Hudson thinks about, oh, I was worried about the show being too woke. And of course, media just ate him up. Like, what are you talking about? And I think his comments are very off-putting. They seem very uneducated because, one, the show is kind of woke. And it's not woke in your face woke, like, oh, look, our characters are gay. Oh, look, our characters are these races. It's more or less woke because it just tells a really grounded story. But it's not up in your face about it. But it gives you the background of a lot of different characters. And the supporting cast around Peter Parker feels like modern New York to me. Right? Like, the supporting cast is mostly other races and different genders of characters that is not white male. And that's perfectly fine because that is our world, especially in a world in a bigger city. I work in a school. I work in a very impoverished school in my city. Most kids are a minority. And that's just how it is. Like, if we were to make a TV show of the school I work with, the main character is probably not white. In fact, there may be one or two supporting characters. Now, if it comes to teachers, that's a whole different story. But I don't get the complaints. And the show is woke in that regard. It is a very organic show. It feels very natural. It feels modern New York to me. Yeah, that being said, let's get into it after a short break. All right, this review is for the first 2 episodes of Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man. And as you heard in the intro, it's really good. Borderline great. Honestly, this might be, for a brand new show, a brand new animated show to be exact, this might be the greatest start you could have to a brand new show. The first 2 episodes, they're called Amazing Fantasy and The Parker Look, which I think as a Spider-Man fan, I love those titles. The Amazing Fantasy, that's what Spider-Man introduced himself in. So that being the pilot episode, great choice. The Parker Look, which is interesting because like it wasn't described typically as like the normal Parker Look, but I just love that like that's what the episode is called, The Parker Look, because that's such a Peter Parker thing. Especially in the comics. This show is, I will say, well, I'm not going to talk like what happens beat per episode. I don't have the attention span for it, nor do I know if most of my audience has the attention span for it. And there's a bunch of other shows that's going to cover it or a bunch of other YouTubers, podcasters that's going to do that for you. More or less, I'm just going to give you my thoughts in a little bit more specific, other than it's great, it's amazing, it's spectacular, it's ultimate, pun intended. So I think the first thing I'm going to cover is what I love about this show is that it feels fresh, it feels unique, but it also reminds me of a bunch of other stuff that came before it, and it like for good reasons. First comparison, Spectacular Spider-Man. It's an animated show. It was the show that was on, I believe, the not CW. I believe it was on Cartoon Network prior to Disney buying Spider-Man. And because Spider-Man was bought by Disney, Marvel was bought by Disney, along with the Spider-Man TV rights, they canceled the show and then made The Ultimate Spider-Man, which was really sad because that show was great. And the reason why I compare Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man to Spectacular Spider-Man is because narratively, this is what it reminds me of. It reminds me of kind of like its own retelling. Spectacular Spider-Man takes kind of like an Ultimate Spider-Man, the comic book Ultimate Spider-Man twist on it. And it gives you all the characters that you know. And again, it's a great show if the race swapping, gender swapping bothers you, because these are all like, all the characters match their comic book counterparts. But the reason why the comparison between the two shows is because narratively, that's what Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man is. You have these group of characters, you have these group of high school characters, and it's about Peter Parker going to high school and dealing with his problems as a high school student. And you have a lot of fleshed out characters in the background that have their own story to tell. You have Nika Minora, which is I didn't realize this at the moment, but Nika Minora she's a character from the Runaways. I read both the Runaways comic and watched, I think, at least the first season of the show. I don't remember if there was a second season or if I would have watched the second season because that show was okay. She's a great addition. She plays a really interesting role. She reminds me of Michelle Jones, Spider-Man. Michelle Jones, MJ, a little bit. And I think a lot of people thought this was MJ, but no, it's Nika Minora. Just a good, she's a mixture between MJ and Ned. Peter Parker's best friend, that person that he can talk to, and when he goes to school every day, that's his person. Then you have his crush, which is Pearl Penguin. I don't really know this character. She is Wave in the comics. Don't know if that's the route they're taking. And then you have the high school bully, and I really love this twist because it's Lonnie Lincoln, who's Tombstone in the comics. But he plays off like Flash. But the cool thing about this, and I really thought he was Flash, and I thought they just race swapped Flash, which they did in the MCU, Tom Holland Spider-Man anyway. But I think what I really loved about this was that this isn't Flash, this is Lonnie Lincoln, this is Tombstone. But he's also a character where instead of being that antagonist you were thinking he was going to be, no, he's just a friendly, nice dude, right off the bat. And he's in the show, they're like, hey, we need to do, science partners. And he turns around, he's like, I want to be with Peter Parker. And the first thing you're thinking of is oh, that's kind of a smart move. Dumb, football jock, looks to the smartest kid in class, Peter Parker, and is like, he's going to be my science partner. And then the first initial talk is just Peter is explaining chemistry, quantum physics to him, and Lonnie just looks at him. He's like, oh, you mean this, this, and this? And Peter's like, what? He's like, yeah, I actually have a brain. And that's how their relationship kicked off. And, prior to that, Lonnie was dating his crush, Pearl. Of course, Flash and Liz, very much Spectacular Spider-Man, because that's another story. That's where the comparison is. But it's really, really cool that Lonnie isn't his antagonist. He's essentially a friend. He's very Harry Osborn-like. And what's really cool about this is we kind of get the history of his character a little bit. Hey, he's this high school football star. He's getting looked at for offers, but then the camera stays on him as he goes home, and you see he is this perfect golden boy of a kid who lives in a impoverished neighborhood, and he's more or less attempting to get out of that impoverished neighborhood, going to school, but also goes back home to take care of his family, but not happily. He has a little sigh as he walks home. And this is why I really like the show. It's because they have all the normal Spider-Man beats, but then the camera will just follow a character, and just the simple, just seeing his environment and seeing how he sighs to that environment makes him a lot more interesting character, especially that we know that he becomes Tombstone. At least we know in the comic books he becomes Tombstone. And I'm excited for the fact that this might be a villain in the next couple seasons. If it's not the first season, second or third. And Disney did greenlight this to 3 seasons, which is huge. And so I'm like, ooh, that's interesting. I'm excited to see where that goes, especially if Tombstone and Spider-Man become big villains again, Spectacular Spider-Man. Pretty sure this was an inspiration for them. But if they can just dive deep on that relationship, that's exciting. That's thrilling to me. That's okay, yeah. If I knew this is what this show was going to be about, I'd have been hyped 6 months ago. So first comparison though, Spectacular Spider-Man. The other comparison, and I'm really happy that they're now coming out at the same time, Invincible. This show, animation wise, reminds me a lot like Invincible. Music wise, there's a lot of live action music similar to Creatures Commandos, similar to Invincible, and also similar to the other inspiration I was going to lay out, which is Into the Spider-Verse or Across the Spider-Verse, because those parallels are also here. The show reminds me of Invincible just because it's very it's really, wow, I'm struggling today. Sorry, folks. It's really down to earth. It's very it's a very grounded superhero story, even though there's a lot of ungrounded things. It reminds me of Into the Spider-Verse because it's very comic book like. It has a lot of different scenes that looks like you're just watching a comic book. The animation of this show, and we're going to dive from inspiration to the animation piece of it and the soundtrack. Animation of the show, great. There is times where the show doesn't look the greatest. It's a little off. But I think there's also a lot of moments where you're just like, I'm digging the style. A lot of transition animation it just pops. Into the Spider-Verse is a lot like that. The show isn't as elite in its animation, and I think that it shows from time and time again, but it's nothing that the animation's so bad it takes me out of the story. This animation's move, it's very poppy, it jives with the background. New York in this show is its own character, which is a testament to animation, the editing, as well as the music. Freaking love the music in this. Alt J, I love how that's Alt J, the band, is more or less like Spider-Man's theme song in MCU Spider-Man. I think it's just fascinating, and I love that they played it. Talking about the story a little bit and some of the characters, I really love that we don't have a Spider-Man show that's just stuck in Spider-Man lore. I love that this show is in MCU lore, and it's based off MCU. This isn't the same universe, but this is very similar to the MCU. The Spider-Man is very similar to Tom Holland. It's very similar that Aunt May is already there, that Uncle Ben is already gone. You have a very similar setup to MCU Spider-Man, but that's more or less just the tipping point. Iron Man's in the show. Captain America, or Iron Man he's a bobblehead for Aunt May at one point. You know that he's in the universe. There's a picture of Captain America. Doctor Strange shows up in the very first scene with this symbiotic alien that is very much has the Venom symbiote. The first scene where they go up to show up the Midtown High. Peter Parker is all excited because he's hey, they have all these different classes, all these different things that I want to study. First day, Doctor Strange shows up and the building blows up because he's in the middle of a fight. And it's such a cool scene. It's just cool to think that it reminds me of the animated Spider-Man from the early 90s, where it's mostly Spider-Man lore, but other characters will just randomly show up. And the fact that this is an MCU Spider-Man, this is a show that has that runway, has that opening to show all these other characters that can interact with Spider-Man, has me thrilled. Other characters that I'm excited for, Norman Osborn is an interesting character in this. And I think he's an interesting character because he more or less replaces Tony Stark as being the mentor. In the first episode, he greets Peter Parker. He invites him in to Oscorp to essentially be an intern. In the second episode, the Parker Luck, we get all these different characters that are also interns, which is very much into Spider-Man lore, which makes sense. Is very similar to other things that we've watched. Spectacular Spider-Man being one of them, again. But in this one, we have Asha, we have Jean, and we have Amadeus Cho. Amadeus Cho is the only one that I'm super familiar with. And this idea of hey, Peter Parker is going to be working for Norman Osborn, and at the end of that episode, we get Norman Osborn just being You're Spider-Man, huh? Which leads to the trailer of Spider-Man working for Norman Osborn, him using the white suit, as you guys can see, the white suit in the background. I'm fascinated by that. I don't have much more to say because I'm like, I don't know where this goes, but everything that they're setting up is fascinating. On top of the fact that the animation, the music, and everything it's just a vibe. The show is such a vibe. So yeah, your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man premiere was great. My rating for it, as I said, is probably the highest rating I can give it. I'm gonna say the floor of the show is a 4 minus. I'm gonna say this show right now for the premiere is a 4. Solid 4. It's a great show. Great start. The worst that I can see this being is a 4 minus show. At best, though, we'll see. This could be a 5. We'll see down the road. This very much is in line of like Invincible, Creatures Commandos. Like, it's that good of quality. And I was really surprised that this was the quality that we got. And I'm kind of sad that I wasn't more hyped for the show to begin with. And I'll also say this. I needed this show. Didn't realize I needed it. I needed it. We are in the middle of the apocalypse. Or it feels like we're in the middle of the apocalypse. And I'm really, really excited that I have Invincible and Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man, 2 animated shows that are great in quality, coming out each and every week, at least for the next month until Daredevil comes out. And that's exciting times. At least exciting times to be a comic book nerd during apocalypse times, at least if you live in America. That being said, I'm your host, Jake Sherbing, signing off. Don't forget to cue the music.